G'day everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Australian Property Investment Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Christie David, and each episode I like to invite a special guest to come on, share their knowledge, impart some wisdom, and we get to pick their brain for a lot of commonly asked questions that we get from our clients. Before we do kick off, I want to emphasize that this chat and this conversation is general in nature and not intended to give advice. So do seek out professional guidance and advice if that's what you're after as well, that relates to your situation. Today's guest, I've had the pleasure of knowing Keeta for some time as well, and lives in a wonderful part of Australia up on the Sunshine Coast, which is the topic of our discussion today, which is one of the golden child to come out of the Australian property market over the last couple of years. We'll be talking all things Sunshine Coast in a second, but before we kick off, Keeta runs a buyer's agency called Ocean Buyers Agency, and he's got a very long career in property. It goes back to renovating property, she says, for fun, and we're going to talk about how fun renovating properties are since 2003, after being abroad for quite some time as well. During this time, Keeta's been in business more than 15 years, started businesses, purchased businesses, grown, invested in them as well. So knowing business, knowing property is a very unique skill set for Keeta as well. With Keeta's business doing Ocean Buyers Agency, it's very much, and I love this mantra, which is hope, helping other people every day, which is a very nice sentiment. Welcome to the show, Keeta.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Absolutely. And it won't be long before we actually catch up in the person, because we're heading to the Sunshine Coast for a small break. And it must be fun living in I wouldn't say a holiday town, but a highly sought after destination, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess, we might talk a little bit about that. It's become highly more sought after, specifically in the last probably 18 months due to everything that's happened globally with the pandemic, but also just, it's the lifestyle change. But I guess I just wanted to touch on, for those that may be listening that don't know, where the Sunshine Coast actually is. So the Sunshine Coast is in Queensland. It's north of Brisbane obviously being the capital city of Queensland. And so the Sunshine Coast extends from Caloundra in the south all the way to Noosa in the north, and extends out to the west, so out to the Sunshine Coast hinterland, which is Maleny, Montville, Mapleton type area. And there's lots of other suburbs, but just to give you the geographical understanding of where the Sunshine Coast is.
It's excellent. I mean, it's very similar to what we've got, which is the South Coast, right? And we're on the South Coast of New South Wales, but it's like, well, the South Coast of Sydney or New South Wales, and how far does that actually go, and how far is south? So thanks very much for clarifying that. But before we kick off, it's what I like to call the 3 Ps. So a bit about yourself personally, a bit about yourself professionally, a bit about your own property journey as well.
Okay. So personally, I guess I've competed in a few triathlons, and I've also competed in the Queenstown, New Zealand Marathon. But now I enjoy ocean swimming. So I'm a super active person. Obviously, you can see that from my history. But now it's all about ocean swimming. So taking it a little bit easier on the body, getting in the water, setting me up for the day. There's probably 30 or so swimmers that meet in the morning between 6:30 and 7, and we swim about 1 kilometre. And it's just a really great way to start the day. And there's age groups all the way up to 80 years of age, and every speed of swimming. And it's just, like I say, a really great way, breathing in the water is just, it's magical for me. I really, really love it. So that's probably on a personal note. And then professionally, was it?
Yeah.
So professionally, I probably think back to, I grew up on a farm, and I remember my parents always turning on the TV and watching the news and waiting for the stock market report, and then waiting for the weather, obviously, because we were farmers. And I remember thinking, this is so boring. I am never, ever, when I get older, going to watch the news, watch the stock market. This is just so pointless. Fast forward a number of years, a number of decades, and now you'll find me reading the Financial Review, looking at stock charts, watching, crypto, bullion, the property market. So it's really interesting how when you're growing up, you think, I'm never ever going to do that. And then it's kind of just imprinted in your brain that that's what you end up doing. And so investing.
You're a product of your environment, right?
Yeah, 100%, right? And so I guess, so my professional life has been, moving through that investing, all different facets of investing, share trading, crypto, like I say, and then into property investing. And now, as you mentioned, Oceans Buyers Agency, which is, all about your dreams becoming my dreams. And as you said, my acronym of HOPE, helping other people every day. And then my property journey was the last point that you mentioned. So investing for me started renovating 1-bedroom units. That was what was affordable for me at the time. And then I progressed. I just got bigger and bigger, I guess. So, renovating 1-bedrooms, renovating 3-bedrooms, renovating triplexes. And then I was adding value to homes. So building in under Queenslanders to refinance, to draw out the equity. For me, that strategy worked, to then keep buying. And then I did some renovations in the UK as well. So, and that was interesting. I was, it's a different language, I guess, is my point. So, we talk about investing in other cities, other countries, and it was definitely a learning experience. Would I recommend it? Everybody needs to run through their own risk threshold and work out whether or not that's for them. But it was the terminology, I guess, is my point. As much as I can say, yeah, I'm an international investor, it was the terminology that you needed to really get up on. So here is a renovation. We call it a renovation. In the UK, they call it a refurbishment. That's just one tiny term that you got to make sure you're on the same language.
Well said. Well said. Excellent. And I guess there's that beautiful saying, like, you connect the dots looking backwards. So everything about your journey, being in business, being in property, being in finance, growing up on a farm, for example, that has now led you to this point and now helping others. And I love the buyer's agency proposition, because someone in a buyer's corner going through this experience with their vested interest, I feel like it's not long before most buyers will go down the path of engaging a buyer's agency, right? Yeah,
absolutely.
Therefore, we talked about the Sunshine Coast, and I really want to hone in on this because, like you said, it's a corridor. There's a cliche that there's suburbs within suburbs. So I feel like you go to the Sunshine Coast, but not all suburbs will perform, similarly. There'll be areas that outperform as well and continue to outperform. So let's just go back a step. And it's a fairly obvious answer that COVID drove a lot of demand, for example, and look at Gold Coast. And we've touched on the Gold Coast previously, but Sunshine Coast is another one. What was the allure that took people to the Sunshine Coast versus maybe going to the Gold Coast, Keeta?
Oh, that's a really good question. I'm a little bit biased, I guess, because I do live on the Sunshine Coast, so it's probably not the right person to ask, but still good question. Look, I think it's purely lifestyle, I know that in terms of, for me, comparing Sunshine Coast to Gold Coast does have a lot of high density living. They do have a lot of skyscrapers, for want of a better term, on the beach. The Sunshine Coast doesn't have that at this point in time. I don't believe personally that it will get to those skyscrapers, but it was fueled by lifestyle is what I'm trying to say. And I also believe that based on the last, 2 years, 18 months of the pandemic, it was also the working from home model that was broadly and widely accepted by employers and also small business owners, that they went, well, I can actually live anywhere in the world. We've always wanted to live, we were maybe a little bit confined to Australia, to be fair, but I've always wanted to live at the beach. I've always wanted to talk about the Sunshine Coast. So we saw the Southerners moving up. That was predominantly what drove that demand. But I guess you're asking about the attraction. The other attraction is it's a very active lifestyle on the Sunshine Coast. We get up early, or most people do. We get up early, we exercise, we get into our day, we get things done, and then the air's clean, the water's clean. It's and that's not to say we also have the tree change as well. So we have people that have moved that want to be in the hinterland, that love trees, that want to grow their own vegetables. There is, I believe also that that's what's happening at the moment in society, is that people they do want a little bit more space. They do want to grow their own vegetables. They do want to connect back to community. So a number of factors there. I hope that answered your question, that was drawing people to the Sunshine Coast.
Yeah, spot on. I mean, I told you before that we headed up there for a holiday. I quickly Googled gyms, and there was no shortage of gyms throughout the
Yeah,
Sunshine Coast. Yeah, it just
yeah.
showed me. People actually, the weather's so conducive to having an active lifestyle and being out and about. But yeah, it just shows that there's a huge amount of people that kind of invest in their health, fitness, well-being. It's you move there because you want that lifestyle, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think, to be fair, for our lovely Southerners, it's also the climate. Like, the climate is, it is warmer. There are, historically, not excluding this year because it's been a little bit unprecedented, but historically we have more sunny days, we have more warmer days. So I believe there is definitely a climate element as well that attracts people to Queensland and to the Sunshine Coast.
Absolutely. And then we talk about the shift. So you talk about the Southerners coming through, and with that brings a real change in the area's demographics, for example, a real change in the community fabric as well, because there's sometimes they're called blow-ins, sometimes they're not considered locals until it takes some time, right? So I guess there's always that little bit of shift. I don't want to say resistance, but sometimes it's a changing of the guard, which is new people coming in, they're paying top dollars, locals get squeezed out of the market, for example. There's a real shift that happens on the ground, some for the better, and some has a different unintended consequence as well. So take me through, what have you seen personally when you're going through, oh, there's a real noticeable shift in the people or the air as well?
Yeah, it's a really good question and point that you make, because there definitely has been a changing of the guard. So what's been happening, what I can see has been happening is our locals, so the people that were potentially born here or have been here for a long time, and on the Sunshine Coast, a long time is 40 years plus. You're not a local until it's that long. So what's happened is yes, we've seen this rapid price increase, again over the last 18 months, and that we've seen the turnover in properties. So therefore we've seen the turnover in the community, in that our retirees or our locals have gone, I'm cashing in. We've got great terms. We've got auctions happening. We've got cooling off periods are being waived. We've got all these people that are prepared to pay over and above what we thought we would ever get for our house, because, to be fair, it's taken, I believe, 15 years for the Sunshine Coast price to get to where it is. Mm-hmm. So, like, the massive jump, the massive increase, I believe that price is now here to stay, but that's a personal belief as well. So we've seen that changing of the guard, as you've said, and our locals or our long-term community have sold, and they're moving north. They're moving further out and further afield. So you can see, I was just talking to someone last week in the Sunshine at Sunshine Beach, which is a suburb of the Sunshine Coast. They've recently moved from Melbourne to Sunshine Beach. And I said, how are you finding the community? Because that community was quite tight. Yeah. And they said, it's actually refreshing, because there's so many new people that have moved here that everybody wants to connect and create a new community and create a new connection, that people are happy to talk and connect. And I thought, well, that's really beautiful. For me, that was beautiful.
Yeah, exactly right. And I can say, personal experience share is when we moved out of Sydney down here, it is absolutely something that you face, which is people have been around here for a very, very long time. They're very loyal, for example. They're very proud of where they live. And I guess it's not territorial is the word, but it's almost like they want to keep that ethos of that community, for example, together. And, people coming in, you want them to buy into that local vision of the community, which is health, fitness. We care about our neighbours, for example, and not to have that impersonal nature that maybe comes from sometimes the capital cities, right?
Definitely. Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. You mentioned there are a couple of suburbs, and when people move in, and we've talked about a couple of suburbs within your the Sunshine Coast as well. Mm-hmm. If I'm an investor, and investors have been drawn there, so you talk about rapid price growth, for example, have rents kept up? Because that's obviously a big market for yield. That's one question. Mm-hmm. And then let's go to the next question there, which is, which suburbs could or have performed better than other suburbs as well?
In terms of the first question, which is rental yields, rents have definitely also experienced a jump, I would suggest. So they're chasing to keep up, to catch up. So what we've seen is that either leases have not been renewed, and previous investors have sold that investment stock, which then we obviously see either a new investor or an owner-occupier buying that property. But if it's an investor, that's when we're seeing that increase in rent. So I was just looking at some stats this week, and the industry stats are that the implied yield is between 4 and 4.8% at the moment for June 2022. So what we're seeing is, like I say, we're seeing that turnover of stock. So there's turnover of the property, but then people that are in existing leases, they're seeing at the end of their lease a massive jump. In some cases, I've heard of $100 or $150 a week increases. So yes, it's keeping up. Yes, there's also, an understanding that, again, with the property prices, they've rapidly increased, and so there's now this understanding that rents have done that as well, and it kind of had to, which is good for investors. Not so good for renters maybe, but with that we've seen a new community, as you've said. It's also a changing of the guard of renters that are on the Sunshine Coast as well. So yeah, rents are definitely keeping up. Yeah. And I'm sorry, what was your second question?
And the next question is then, if we talk about the suburbs that are performing, so the suburbs that have performed particularly well, for example, and had that extraordinary growth, and then maybe what you're seeing is maybe those up and coming suburbs that may kind of have that next
Yeah, sure. So I don't necessarily like to name names in terms of suburbs, but what we can definitely see is, in terms of those two groups that you've identified, is that the suburbs that have performed well is honestly the whole of the Sunshine Coast. You really can't discriminate against any one suburb, because we've seen such a massive shift in people coming and buying, that every suburb of the Sunshine Coast has performed well. You may identify that there are different areas, being the coastal area. So we have a highway called the Sunshine Motorway. To the east of the Sunshine Motorway is what I would classify as the coastal area. You may find more of an owner-occupier there, but then again, that's not necessarily true either, because then the west of the highway is kind of, the hinterland, and suburbs like Budrum is a very popular suburb. But at the same time, go back to your investor fundamentals, given that we're talking to the investor market. Where's the transport hubs? Where are the amenities? Then we've also had a lot of families that move up. There's a lot of great great schools on the Sunshine Coast, be it public or private. Those areas are always going to do well, because we've seen families come that have started to rent near the school catchment area that then want to buy. So you're always going to have, little pockets, as we know as investors, around those core fundamentals that will always do well.
Yeah, beautiful. And then we talked about, I guess, the whole corridor being really high performing. Are we seeing types of properties? Because I know there are quite a lot of units that have come on, newish type of units, for example. Are there some that are favouring investors over others? For example, maybe the bigger houses that have the 3 or 4 better for the families, plus a study so people can work from home. Is that something that's attracting people, or the units where people are looking to downsize? What's been the change in the actual property types as well?
So we've seen in the last couple of years a lot of brand new unit developments, like 6, 7, 8 stories high down in the Maroochydore area, and also Boccarina, which is to the south of Mooloolaba. So units are performing well. I believe that existing stock is also performing well, in terms of, something that needs to be tidied up, something that can be renovated a little bit. But then at the same time, we have a supply demand issue on the Sunshine Coast. So at this point in time, it really doesn't matter what you buy, because with that supply and demand issue, there's a massive rental crisis on the Sunshine Coast as well. And that is also, I believe, because Bernard Salt, who's one of the top demographers in Australia, he terms that one of the acronyms he uses, VESPAs, which was the virus escapees, which we briefly spoke about. So all the southerners coming up in the last 18 months. So they've come and they're the owner occupiers. So they're not necessarily coming to rent, they're coming to buy. So they've taken a lot of this investor stock that we spoke about before, the changing of the guards that also comes with the owner occupiers selling. Changing the guards has seen that the investment stock has been sold, and that's now got owner occupiers in there. Hence, we now have a rental crisis on the Sunshine Coast as well. So I know it's a bit of a political answer, but honestly, it doesn't matter if you're buying your standard 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom, or if you're buying, a 2-bedroom unit. It honestly, at this point in time on the Sunshine Coast, again, go back to your fundamentals. What do you need next in your portfolio? Where do you want it to be? How many bedrooms do you want it to have? But you're going to get your rental return, and your demand is there. I mean, we've heard stories that there's 20 or 25 groups lining up to rent properties on the Sunshine Coast over that last 18-month period again. I mean, not so much now, but there's still definitely 10, 15 groups turning up to rental properties.
There's no quick fix, because the building pipeline is probably very similar to other areas, which is it's a long time to get some of these properties completed. So it's not, like you mentioned, the supply side is not keeping up with the demand side, and it's just going to keep putting that pressure on rent and probably keep that upward pressure, or at least hold steady for the house prices as well, isn't it?
And you're absolutely right. So there's been a lot of discussion with, organisations and community groups and the council around, well, what do we do? What do we do to solve this? And exactly as you highlighted, yes, there's a pipeline of development that needs to occur, but there's a snowball effect of, well, council need to choppity chop, hurry up and approve those. And then you've got the smaller community groups, the advocates for the community that don't want it to change, that don't want it to be like the Sunshine Coast, the Gold Coast, which I don't believe it ever will be. But we've got people that want to live here. And I think that the progress is great, but we also need to work out, well, what does that look like? And so I think going back to one of your questions of, what investment stock is there? There's definitely, a requirement for duplexes and triplexes, and there is infill development happening, if you call it that, in some of the other suburbs on that coastal strip. That's also a possibility too.
So let me go back to this. When you talk about the future of this corridor and the amount of investment that's going into it, for example, I know there's a mountain of work that's going in to put the Sunshine Coast on the map, from a tech perspective, from a livability perspective and development. So can you just elaborate a little bit from what that's being invested into this region as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's currently $12.5 billion worth of infrastructure projects that's underway or being completed. Like it's massive, and it's actually quite exciting, I believe, for the Sunshine Coast in terms of what is going to happen here. There's the new Maroochydore CBD. I don't know if you've seen that, but it's a site owned by council, and now they've conjuncted with a big multinational development corporation, and it's 53 hectares of land adjacent to the Maroochydore Centre. It's going to have, new office accommodation, residential developments and hotel developments. And I've seen the design. It's actually quite schmick. And I was also reading in terms of size, the Maroochydore CBD is actually going to be bigger than the Brisbane CBD. So, if you think about it in that aspect. But then we've also got the Sunshine Coast Airport. So they just recently completed a brand new runway that was a $347 million project, which will allow the Sunshine Coast to receive bigger planes. There's going to be direct international connections. We've also got I don't know if you've seen a new Australian airline called Bonza. They've said that they will have their head office located at the Sunshine Coast. So that's exciting too. And then we've got the public hospital that was the Sunshine Coast University Hospital that was completed down in Britannia or Kawana. They're two suburbs as well in that area of the Sunshine Coast. And that was a $1.8 billion project that was completed. And it's been termed as, the largest health precinct in the Southern Hemisphere. So and you mentioned the submarine cable. No idea how they do that, but it's, under the water, connects directly to Asia. It's been connected directly to the Maroochydore CBD, and it hasn't, from my understanding, been connected to the community yet. So we don't actually know what that's going to do for us, for the community at large, but the intention is, high-speed internet. We're going to be like Silicon Valley in the US. We've got all these amazing big multinational corporates that have we've got a spotlight on the Sunshine Coast going, here they are, this is what they're doing, look at all the amazing things they're doing. And then we've also got the 2032 Olympics that are coming in 10 years' time. And so, I know it sounds like a long way away, but it won't take long to get here. And with that, there's going to be more spending on accommodation and, another spotlight on the Sunshine Coast. Will we see finally the high-speed train that's going to come from Brisbane direct to the Maroochydore CBD? I don't know. Watch this space. But that's definitely exciting for the Sunshine Coast community because, for the last, feels like 15 years, the Bruce Highway has been continually work happening on the Bruce Highway, which is the main road from Brisbane to the Sunshine Coast. And that it's peak hour. It doesn't matter what time you go on that highway, it's peak hour. It's so full of traffic. So, I think if there was a high-speed train, that might be great for the region and for the community at large as well.
Yeah, so that's what I feel for a lot of investors that are looking at this corridor. Like you said, there's a spotlight on it going, find somewhere in the country that's got this level of investment that's attracting this type of talent to the area, for example. These people will move there. They'll want to buy a home, for example. So you can imagine what's going to do just to keep house prices and that growth, that momentum keep rolling as well. I think it's such an exciting prospect when you have an area that's got a vision and attracts people to that vision. You can see what it's going to look like as well. Yeah, it just becomes all the hallmarks for sustained success for an area as well, right? Really attraction type business area.
Absolutely. And I think, we've talked a little bit around the fundamentals of investing and my belief is one of those core fundamentals of investing is what's the infrastructure spending happening in that area. And, if you do some research on the Sunshine Coast or, hopefully I've helped to highlight some of the infrastructure spending and projects that are happening on the coast. There is a lot happening on the Sunshine Coast right now and into the next 15, 20 years. Those greenfield sites that we talked about, they're not going to build 20,000 houses in 12 months. That's long term. And even the Maroochydore CBD, that's projected to be, into the next 15 to 20 years as well, actually.
Yeah, excellent. No, wonderful. Keeta, I think it's super exciting and I can just feel you kind of going, this is my patch, is proud about it. And that's what we need. You need people that have that experience on the ground, those relationships on the ground as well. So if someone's looking to buy, invest, move there, someone like yourself becomes invaluable to go, hey, look, maybe not this area or maybe this type of property, for example, tap someone on the shoulder going, there's something off market, for example. And that's again, the value of the buyer's agent to go, you're not just paying a fee to find a property, you're paying for the knowledge, the insights and those relationships as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You're 100% right.
Wonderful. Hey, Keeta, I want to say thank you very much for being generous, not only with your time, but also your wisdom and your energy as well. So thank you very much. We'll include the details to Ocean's Buyers Agency and Keeta's info if you want to reach out and have a chat. And I just want to say on behalf of our listeners, thank you very much. I look forward to our coffee when we're on the Sunshine Coast and hopefully there's more sun than there is down here at the moment. And looking forward to working on my tan very much.
Sounds awesome. And congratulations on your 6th birthday.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. We did turn 6 recently and celebrated the milestone with our team, which has been wonderful. Just a journey of 6 years to grow this business. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, that's a wrap for another episode of the Australian Property Investment Podcast. If you found that helpful, feel free to leave us a comment. If you have other questions that you have, any questions that you want answered, please drop us a note and we'd love to answer your questions in one of our episodes as well. That's a wrap. We'll see you next time.